2012 was a superlative year in the world of sports. In football, you not only had the Euros, held in Poland and Ukraine, but also the latter half of the Barclays Premier League season, which culminated in possibly the most entertaining title-deciding game in its history, with two intercity rivals trading blows on the final day of a gruelling campaign. Furthermore, there was an epic run to the Champions League final from Chelsea, who beat prime Messi-era Barcelona in the semis and Bayern Munich in the final to seal their first ever trophy in the competition. Elsewhere, Novak Djokovic and Rafa Nadal took part in the longest match of their tennis careers at the Australian Open, and to cap it all off, the Olympic Games were held across the summer in London, the capital city of the United Kingdom, to great fanfare. While other sports had their own exciting moments, the world of Formula 1 was reeling from the previous year, where the dominance of Red Bull's Sebastian Vettel overshadowed a season that had plenty of fantastic races. Heading into 2012, everyone was hoping to see more competition, new storylines, and most importantly, a championship battle. Nothing has ever been guaranteed in F1, but surely it could be better than what came last year. The events that would end up transpiring across 20 countries and 5 continents, from the start of action in early February to a nail-biting end in November, would provide dramatic action throughout, with superb individual performances, exciting events that couldn't even be scripted into existence, and a true feeling going into every weekend that you had no idea who was going to win the race. With that being said, let me tell you the story of what is, in my opinion, the greatest season in Formula 1 history. The teams rolled into Spain in early February for testing around the Jerez circuit, which had hosted a total of 7 Grand Prix between 1986 and 97, and as usual, journalists and fans alike were attempting to make sense of the times being set. 4 different drivers from 3 teams topped the times during each day, with some struggling with setups more than others, but the main topic of conversation wasn't about who was fast and who was slow, but instead concerning the ugly new stepped-nosed front ends of every car but the McLaren due to new regulations brought in to improve crash safety. In terms of performance, the Woking outfit and Red Bull looked like the most confident teams after Jerez, along with Williams, Mercedes and Toro Rosso, who had all shown marked improvements from 2011. Ferrari, however, was struggling to get to grips with their all-new F2012 chassis, having completely started from scratch following a weak previous year that only saw them claim 1 race victory. Heading into the season proper, most believed it would be another walk in the park for Red Bull, but as the first race in Melbourne would prove, people should have been far more optimistic than that. The first qualifying session of the year brought about the sort of chaos you might expect, as during the first session, when 24 cars were out on track, many drivers impeded each other's laps in Q1. However, for the most part, it was the expected culprits falling out at the first session. The Caterhams, Marussias and HRTs all failed to advance, the latter team with both cars outside of 107% time, meaning they failed to qualify for the first round of the season for the second year running. Also out of Q1 was Kimi Räikkönen, who was returning to Formula 1 after a 2-year break, having made an error on his final run, which prevented him from getting higher than 18th. Ferrari's pre-season struggles were shown to be prevalent in the second segment, as both Fernando Alonso and Felipe Massa were knocked out in 12th and 16th, with the Spaniard having caused a red flag midway through the session by beaching his car in the gravel at turn 1. They joined 1 each of the Toro Rosso, Sauber, Williams and Force India cars in elimination, which meant that 7 teams made it into the 10 places available in Q3, with only 3 of those, namely McLaren, Red Bull and Mercedes, having both drivers in the final session. It would end up being Lewis Hamilton who took pole position, while his teammate Jenson Button completed the front row, still a surprise, as many thought Red Bull still topped the pile performance-wise. Romain Grosjean, another driver making his first F1 appearance in over 2 years, qualified 3rd for Lotus, while Michael Schumacher secured the best grid spot since his return to the sport with Mercedes in 2010. The Milton Keynes machines of Webber and Vettel took the 3rd row, while Nico Rosberg, Pastor Maldonado, Nico Hulkenberg and rookie Daniel Ricciardo on home turf rounded out the top 10. Before the start of the race, Sergio Perez, who was due to start in 17th on the grid, took a 5-place penalty for a gearbox change, dropping him to the back row. At the start of the opening round of the season, the frontrunners got away mostly well, apart from Grosjean, who dropped from 3rd on the grid to 6th at the first corner, while Bruno Senna was involved in his own incident that involved Webber, Hulkenberg, who retired, both Toro Rosso drivers, and the Marussia of Charles Pic. Alonso capitalised on the midfield chaos, allowing the Spaniard to climb into 8th. On the second lap, heading into the final sector, Maldonado sent a move on Grosjean and the pair made contact, buckling the Frenchman's wheel and sending him out of the race in an instant, the incident also allowing Alonso to usurp his Venezuelan rival, who then made an error and lost 2 positions on lap 5. Vettel made a small mistake of his own shortly after, but the first major event of the race came when Schumacher's gearbox failed on lap 11 while he was fending off his younger compatriot for 3rd place, robbing him of his first real opportunity to achieve a podium since his comeback began in 2010. The pit window for the free-stop strategy opened as Massa soon came in, followed by Rosberg a lap later, both drivers having been holding up trains of faster cars when they boxed. The Ferrari of Alonso copied his teammates' plan, as did many of the other frontrunners and upper midfield contenders, including race leaders Button and Hamilton, who rejoined in 4th. Perez spent several laps holding up the latter Brit on older tyres he had on from the start, before losing out to both him and Seb behind in the space of half a lap. The Mexican continued falling down the order until he pitted just before half distance, while Button began complaining of vibrations while 11 seconds in the lead. Rosberg began causing a bottleneck in front of Webber and Maldonado for a good while until the Australian tried to move into the fast chicane, at which point the German went deep and cut across the inside of the corner before coming into the pits on the same lap. The leaders began their final stint with just over 20 to go, as both McLarens double stacked, just before a safety car came out as Vitaly Petrov broke down on the main straight. This allowed Vettel to jump Hamilton, while the rest of the front-running group used the cautionary period to make their last stop of the day. Button bolted on the restart, but as the laps ran down, Lewis was hot on the heels of Seb, while the 2 Brazilian compatriots, Massa and Senna, clumsily collided with 10 to go, forcing the former driver to retire. Maldonado also closed upon Alonso, but after dragging his car to top 6 pace when his teammate was completely out of it, in his vain attempt to push hard one last time on the final lap, the Venezuelan got wheel spin on the curb coming out of turn 6 and spun out of what would have been a career best finish, failing to reach the end despite a great performance, just like he did in Monaco during his rookie season, although in that race he was taken out by Lewis Hamilton. This one was completely his own doing though, even if it showed the package of Pastor plus Williams was one with plenty of pace. Button crossed the line first to complete a dominant victory, while Vettel capitalised on the late safety car to beat Hamilton, followed by a decent recovery drive from Webber and Alonso rounding out the top 5. Kobayashi took 6th after Maldonado's crash, then came Raikkonen, who made up 10 positions from his starting position in 7th, Perez in 8th making the one-stop viable when others had to do 3, Ricciardo on debut in 9th, while Paul di Resta snuck into the final points position after Rosberg suffered steering damage on the last lap by hitting Perez. Maldonado was classified 13th, while the attrition allowed Timo Glock in the Marussia to take a relatively high 14th place by their standards, while Senna and Massa were still deemed to be running due to completing 90% of the race's full distance. Schumacher and Grosjean were the retirees who would most rue what could have been, especially the German, who looked set for a podium in the early stages, although the Mercedes race pace did disintegrate between him dropping out until the checkered flag. The drivers' standings followed the race results, while McLaren led Red Bull in the constructors, followed by Sauber quite surprisingly in 3rd, as both their cars had scored. Ferrari were 4th, thanks to Alonso, then Lotus, Toro Rosso and Force India were the rest who got on the scoreboard in the first round, as Merck, Williams and the 3 backmarker teams Marussia, Caterham and HRT, the latter of which didn't even meet the 107% time to start the race, rounded out the final rankings. The opening round of 2012 provided decent entertainment, not an all-time classic by any means, but definitely one to look back on with relative fondness as it had a few decent big moments and storylines heading into Malaysia. Those storylines would end up being washed away with the weather that had plagued the Grand Prix in Sepang throughout its F1 tenure, but qualifying was dry and it saw yet another McLaren front row lockout with Hamilton on pole yet again. Schumacher one-upped his performance from Melbourne by taking 3rd ahead of Webber, Raikkonen in the Lotus, who would start 10th due to a gearbox replacement penalty, then Vettel, Grosjean, Rosberg, Alonso and Perez rounded out the top 10. Maldonado was 11th, followed by Massa, who made a small improvement on his opening qualifying session of the season, to go 12th. Behind them, there was no real surprises. The other Williams of Senna, the Force Indias sandwiching Ricciardo's Toro Rosso, then Kobayashi 17th, Verne 18th, and the 3 backmarker teams, led by Petrov and Glock, then Pick occupied the penultimate row alongside De La Rosa, whose HRT team had got the DRS system working and helped him and his teammate Karthikeyan break through the 107% barrier. Kovalainen started last after receiving a 5-place grid drop of his own due to an infringement in the round before. The race began in greasy conditions, and everyone except the 2 HRTs put on the intermediate tyres, with the 2 backmarkers gambling on the weather getting worse, putting on the wets instead. The opening corners went by without incident, and most drivers retained position, apart from Grosjean, who moved up into third past Schumacher into turn 1. Webber got by them both on the run up the hill, then the Lotus missed his braking point on the inside of the fourth corner and clattered into the Mercedes, who was trying to go round his outside. Senna towards the back spun in the middle sector, while at the end of the first lap, Perez pitted to gamble himself onto wets, then Massa did the same after 3 more times around the track. Grosjean spun into the gravel and retired shortly after, as a flurry of frontrunners soon boxed as the rain began falling harder on lap 5, with Hamilton coming in a lap later than Button, putting the Brits line astern as Lewis re-entered the circuit. Soon after, Jensen radioed his team to say the track was quote-unquote like a lake and the safety car was deployed, freezing the order in place. Hamilton had kept his lead, followed by Button, while Perez's early gamble as the rain got heavier paid off and put him third. Webber and Alonso rounded out the top 5, Vettel was 6th, and Jean-Eric Vergne had inexplicably coaxed his intermediate tyres around without spinning off, while holding 7th, while the second Ferrari of Massa and Rosberg were 8th and 9th, and the HRT of Karthikeyan had made his wet tyre start work wonders as he was 10th and in the points when the field was frozen. They spent a handful of laps behind the safety car, then the red flag was brought out for an hour to allow the rain to die down. They resumed behind the Mercedes SLS, driven by Bernd Mailander, for another short while, before going back to full racing speed on lap 14. Button came in for inters on the restart, while Vettel struggled in the opening phase, before most of the frontrunners pitted the next time round. Hamilton had problems exiting his box, losing out to Alonso, who had followed him in, and Button, who had undercut him. Jensen's hard work came to nothing, however, when he lost a chunk of his front wing in a clumsy incident with Karthikeyan as the Indian was fighting the Brits for position. The rest of those who hadn't changed from wets to inters did so that time around, and Alonso came out in first, followed by Perez, Hamilton and Rosberg. From that point until about halfway through the race, the order stayed mostly the same, although the aforementioned German began losing positions to those behind. Massa went deep in the middle sector hairpin and lost a position to Paul di Resta, then Jean-Eric Vergne got by 2, while Bruno Senna took Nico Hülkenberg, then attempted to pass Massa. More midfield battles ensued, and Button, as well as Massa, got stuck behind Petrov's Caterham while advancing through the pack, but as the race entered its final third, strategy became the name of the game as Perez also began catching Alonso at a rate of knots. The track was drying up, and on lap 39, the second Ferrari came in for slick tyres, acting as a guinea pig for his leading teammate, who boxed shortly after. Perez stayed out one more lap and lost 8 seconds to his Spanish rival on track, while the fastest times were actually being set by those not in the leading battle, with Webber, then Maldonado going purple, but it was the Australian who took the honour with 13 laps remaining. The Mexican up front, meanwhile, was reining Alonso in by 1.5 to 2 seconds a lap, although this advantage began reducing as the Ferrari became more acclimatised to the conditions. Nonetheless, the gap was still coming down, while with only a handful of laps left, Vettel got a puncture by cutting across Karthikeyan while he was overtaking him under blue flags. Back to the leading battle though, Perez was now within DRS range of a Scuderia car in front of him as he entered the 49th tour of the circuit, and stayed on his tail until the penultimate corner of the next time round. Unfortunately, for the youngster trying to go for his first victory, he made a costly error as the race entered its final stages, losing 5 seconds as he went deep into the penultimate corner. This ended the fight for the win, but the scrap amongst those in the minor points positions was still on, as Vergne in 8th led Hülkenberg and Maldonado. The Venezuelan, however, had a terminal engine issue that put him out on the second to last lap and allowed Schumacher to sneak into the final scoring spot. As Alonso crossed the line to win, his race engineer Andrea Stella was very emotional on the radio.
This is one of the most beautiful. We are so proud of you. So proud of you and of the team.
He'd put on a heroic performance, as had Perez, as the Mexican had delivered a great result amidst rumours he was going to replace Massa at Ferrari. It was a Spaniard who left Sepang sitting on top of the standings, 5 points clear of Hamilton, whose 2 third places had him in runners-up. Button's victory from Melbourne kept him third in the table despite not scoring here due to several incidents. Then came Webber, Perez and Vettel. Raikkonen was the only other driver with points in the double digits in 7th, then came Senna with his impressive drive to 6th. Kobayashi equalled him, while Di Resta rounded out the top 10, followed by the Toro Rossos of Vergne and Ricciardo. Hülkenberg and Schumacher were the only drivers left who had scored, while Rosberg and Maldonado would have both felt peeved off that they had twice fallen out of the points positions in the 2 opening round, as would Grosjean and Massa, except their predicament was entirely their own doing. McLaren took an early Constructors' Championship lead, followed by Red Bull and an entirely one-sided Ferrari. Then came Sauber, Lotus, Force India, Williams and Toro Rosso, with Schumacher's 1 point putting his team ahead of the three backmarkers, who were led by Marussia, as the early gamble from HRT failed to get them any good results so they could leap above Caterham. If Australia was a good season opener, then Sepang was a fantastic sophomore success, which saw chaos in the rain, drama for the leaders, and a youngster seemingly come to light as a future staple of the sport. As the teams headed to Shanghai for the Chinese Grand Prix weekend, there was some controversy that had spilled over from the previous two races. The legality of Mercedes' quote-unquote double DRS system had been called into question by their competitors, yet deemed fully above board by the FIA. Thus, heading to the track with the longest straight on the entire calendar, it seemed clear that they will be in the hot seat to take triumph. It was maybe no surprise then that the two silver arrows occupied the front row of the grid, with Rosberg ahead of Schumacher by 5/10 in qualifying. Kobayashi took a so far career-best third position on the grid, followed by Raikkonen, Button, Webber, Hamilton and Perez in the top 8. Alonso was 9th, one position lower than he had started in Malaysia, then Grosjean rounded out the top 10. After having taken pole in all of the 3 previous runnings of the Chinese Grand Prix, Vettel continued his poor form from the first 2 rounds, failing to reach Q3 for the first time in 41 races, joining Felipe Massa on the 6th row as the Brazilian aimed to get at least a point on the board, as he was currently being beaten 35-0 by his teammate. The two Williams, led by Maldonado, were 13th and 14th, then came the Force Indias on row 8 with De Resta in front of Hulkenberg. After that, the rest of the grid was made up of Ricciardo, the two Caterhams of Kovalainen and Petrov, Glock and Pix Marussias, and the HRT duo were 22nd and 23rd, with Della Rosa 6/10 faster than Karthikeyan. After initially having failed to get out of Q1, Jean-Eric Vergne's team broke Parc Fermé regulations and started him from the pit lane due to the various adjustments made to his Toro Rosso, probably trying to improve his overtaking ability during the race. At the start, the two Mercedes held position, while Kobayashi dropped back, as did Vettel, who got a lot of wheel spin off the line. His teammate Webber and Alonso began fighting over 8th. The defending 2011 champion, who got away badly, was down in 14th place, battling with Maldonado, and he struggled to get through the pack as his straight line speed was one of the slowest of the weekend. The front runners began queuing up behind Schumacher to make an overtake, and Kobayashi pitted on lap 9, while on lap 10, Vettel was one of the first drivers to make a pit stop after his teammate had also done so. Then Raikkonen and Hamilton soon followed this strategy, both feeding back out onto the same piece of tarmac as Webber, and Lewis on the faster option tyre soon established his advantage as the Red Bull behind him muscled out of a Lotus. Button avoided the chaos with the other contenders by extending his stint, then Schumacher came in on lap 13. Unfortunately for him, his right rear wheel wasn't attached properly when he left his box, and thus he had to pull over at the side of the circuit to retire, losing a third potential podium position in as many races. His teammate came in without issue shortly after, then Perez and Massa stayed out a little longer, while Vettel made his way into the fringes of the top 10, slowly by a third race distance. Hamilton did his second stop on lap 23, then his teammate did so from second, as Rosberg held firm out in front. The drivers behind the Mercedes seemed to struggle with tyre wear much more than he was, and in clean air, the German was saving his equipment far better than they were. Despite troubles with the rubber degradation, Button was ranging up by 2 seconds per lap onto the back of him, while Hamilton and Webber were stuck behind the slower Perez, who was on a different strategy. Then Rosberg came in for his final stop with 21 to go, as did the aforementioned Sauber just after. Massa became a bottleneck, holding up several drivers including Raikkonen, Webber and Grosjean, while Button, who was chasing Rosberg for the lead, had a 10-second pit stop, which put him behind this big train. Soon, Kimi was leading the large group of drivers that had extended to the point that 9 cars occupied a space of less than 5 seconds, and Hamilton was scything through the pack, while Alonso ran wide trying to overtake Maldonado. Grosjean then ran wide and rejoined just in front of the Williams, as the ensuing battle saw him and Perez trying to get by the Lotus, but they were both unable to do so. Vettel overtook the other black and gold car with 8 laps to go, triggering a sequence of events that saw Raikkonen lose 11 positions in 1.5 laps due to the sheer drop-off of his tyres, which had been on his car for nearly half the race. After over 10 laps stuck behind Seb, Button finally overtook him with 5 to go, then Hamilton did so on the penultimate tour, as did Webber, while Maldonado, Alonso and Kobayashi scrapped for 8th through to 10th place. Back out front, Rosberg crossed the finish line first, shocking everyone with his tyre management in a car that had a tendency to chew through its rubber, taking his maiden victory in Formula 1 at the 111th time of asking. He was the third different winner from the first 3 races of 2012, and his team was yet another different constructor to take triumph in the same time frame. After disappointing missed opportunities in Australia and Malaysia, he took his first points finish in emphatic style, more than 20 seconds clear of Button, while Hamilton would take another third place. The Red Bull duo took 4th and 5th, with Webber ahead of Vettel, while Grosjean finally got on the scoreboard himself with 6th. Next came the Williams of Senna and Maldonado in 7th and 8th, Alonso in 9th and Kobayashi 10th. After his heroics in Sepang, Perez just missed out on points, as did Di Resta, who was just behind him, and despite running high up early on, Massa still failed to register anything of note. Raikkonen ended up finishing 14th, followed by Hülkenberg, the Toro Rossos of Vernon and Ricciardo, Petrov, Glock, Pick, Della Rosa, Karthikeyan and Kovalainen. There's also an argument to be made that Schumacher had been robbed of 3 consecutive podiums in as many races, yet the German had only 1 point to show for it. Speaking of points, Hamilton led the Drivers' Championship now through sheer consistency, marginally ahead of Button, while Alonso dropped to 3rd after his weak results. Webber was just behind him 4th, then came Vettel, new winner Rosberg, Perez, Raikkonen, Senna and Kobayashi rounding out the top 10 in the standings. Grosjean had finally gotten something on the board, as had Maldonado, but Massa now sat in 18th, only ahead of the drivers in the 3 backmarker teams, on 0 points, just like they were. McLaren still led the constructors ahead of Red Bull, while Ferrari, with one arm tied behind their back, usurped Sauber. Mercedes rocketed up to 5th, displacing Lotus, while Williams overtook Force India and Toro Rosso led Marussia, Caterham and HRT. The weekend in China had an exciting, if slightly too chaotic race, given the sheer unpredictability of the tyres, but the result was another surprise winner, and lots of pace discrepancies led to great wheel-to-wheel racing, meaning that everyone headed into Bahrain in good spirits. Although the teams would have been in a happy mood given the action the season had produced so far, the atmosphere heading into Sakhir was tense. I don't discuss global politics on this channel, however to explain why this event was labelled as controversial, you have to know the context behind it. The 2011 Bahrain Grand Prix had been cancelled due to political instability caused by the Arab Spring protests, however its inclusion on the following year's calendar was seen by many outsiders as ignorant of the issues that still persisted in the country regarding human rights. It was believed that, in order to quell the problems that may have arisen from the race taking place, the Bahraini government set up quieter areas for F1 personnel to stay in, away from potential protesters, and had police cars lining the roads from the capital of Manama to the Grand Prix circuit. This led to the tense atmosphere that I mentioned, and there was also a sense of ambiguity on a sporting front. Thanks to the race being cancelled the previous year, heading into 2012, the teams had no idea how the unpredictable Pirelli tyres would work in the hot, dry desert, which meant that understanding how they would degrade would be worth its weight in gold. Red Bull and McLaren seemed to hold the advantage in one-lap pace, as Vettel and Hamilton occupied the front row, with Webber and Button close behind. Last week's winner Rosberg had made a mistake on the final corner of his last run in Q3 when he had a chance to take pole himself, while in 6th was the otherwise uncompetitive Toro Rosso of Ricciardo. Grosjean and Perez were 7th and 8th, while Alonso and Di Resta opted not to set a time in the top 10 shootout in order to save tyres for the race. Raikkonen continued his struggles from China, on the same row as Kobayashi, who was on the way down from his high grid position in Shanghai. Then came Hülkenberg in 13th, Massa a lowly 14th, Senna 15th, and Caterham of Kovalainen rounding out the 8th row. Maldonado had a curves issue in Q2, which initially had him 17th, but he'd also incurred a 5-place grid penalty for a gearbox change after an undiagnosable fault was discovered earlier in the weekend, which put him 21st. Schumacher, who was down on luck from the previous rounds, continued to struggle, having failed to get out of Q1 along with Jean-Eric Vergne, who also had transmission trouble and was given the same penalty as Maldonado. The rest of the back of the grid was filled with the usual suspects, as Petrov led Pick, Della Rosa, Glock and Karthikeyan in the final 5 spots of the starting order. Everyone began the race on soft, option tyres apart from Kobayashi, who began on a prime rubber aiming to go long. At the start, Alonso and Grosjean were the ones making up places while the leaders held their ground, while Rosberg and Ricciardo fell down the order. Vettel opened up a big lead on the opening lap, followed by Hamilton and Webber, then the fast-starting French Lotus driver was 4th, followed by the Ferrari of Alonso, Button, Raikkonen, who had quietly made up places along with Massa, while Rosberg was 9th ahead of Perez in 10th. Vergne and Maldonado made up places on the first lap, and Ricciardo had dropped from 6th to 16th, and Schumacher was up to 18th. Kovalainen suffered a puncture in the opening melee, and the aforementioned Venezuelan and German made their way by the struggling drivers, fairly easy on lap 2. Then Massa overtook his ex-teammate Raikkonen for 7th as he aimed to score his first points of the season, while the other Lotus got by Webber for 3rd. The Finn from just before repassed the Brazilians shortly after, while Grosjean soon advanced past Hamilton into second place, then Kimi took 6th place off Button. The McLaren drivers soon began complaining about tyre performance on lap 7, and Jensen came in, followed by Massa and Rosberg. Hamilton and Alonso boxed after, and the Brits suffered from a slow stop, putting him down the order. The pit stops played out over the next handful of laps, and DRS stayed out on track for Force India and led a small distance before coming in himself. Vettel reassumed the lead after the early strategies played out, but despite this, Raikkonen in third barreled up the back of his teammate Grosjean and overtook him. On lap 25, Rosberg defended from Alonso very aggressively on the approach to turn 4, leading the Spaniard to utter the now infamous phrase, "All the time you have to leave a space," in return, and the German was noted by the stewards for that incident. Behind those two, while that was happening, Maldonado suffered a puncture, sending him spinning around in a 360, and it took him out of the race. Alonso nearly followed Kobayashi into the pits while trying to slipstream him. Then as the race entered its final stage, Raikkonen was hounding Vettel for the lead, pushing the Red Bull driver hard. The Finn faked a move to the inside, then switched back to the outside of turn 1 on lap 36, but he failed to get by. He then fell back after his first try to get the position, before both pitted at the same time for their last stop. After that, he fell back momentarily but started closing with 10 to go. Unfortunately, this was a false dawn, and the Lotus failed to get nearer than 2.5 seconds to the reigning double champion. Thus, the focus switched to DRS, who'd ran a 2-stop strategy instead of a 3, and sat in 5th until Rosberg got past him. Nonetheless, the Scots management was paying off as he had started outside the top 10, and behind him, the McLaren of Button, who was mounting an attack, had to make an unscheduled stop due to a puncture, while Senna's Williams retired with vibrations. Out in front though, Vettel took a comfortable victory in the end, unchallenged by Raikkonen and Grosjean in the latter stages as the pair picked up their team's first podiums of the season so far. Webber took his 4th consecutive 4th place ahead of Rosberg and DRS, the latter of whom fended off a late charge from Alonso to claim 6th on the alternate strategy. Hamilton was 8th after his slow pit stops held him back, then Massa finally scored his first points of the year in 9th, and Schumacher recovered from his lowly grid position to take 10th on the road. Perez and Hülkenberg narrowly missed out on a top 10 finish, while Ricciardo failed to capitalise on his good qualifying and ended up behind his teammate on Sunday. Button didn't make it to the end due to his mechanical issues, and thus he and his teammates were displaced from the top of the Drivers' Championship. Vettel took the lead by 4 points from Hamilton, then Webber was just 1 behind on a tally of 48. Button dropped to 4th, equal with Alonso, then after Rosberg, Raikkonen and Grosjean vaulted into the top 8. Perez continued to fall behind, as he could no longer rely on his Malaysian heroics to carry him, then came DRS, Senna and Kobayashi. It was a pointless weekend for Sauber and Toro Rosso, but also for Williams, who had suffered a double retirement, and both Verne and Maldonado were equal on 4 points. Ricciardo, Hülkenberg, Massa and Schumacher sat on 2, then came the 3 backmarker teams' drivers, led by Glock and Pick, followed by Petrov, Kovalainen, De La Rosa and Karthikeyan. McLaren also lost their Constructors' Championship lead to Red Bull, while Lotus leapfrogged 3 teams to jump to 3rd ahead of Ferrari, Mercedes and Sauber. Williams was 7th, Force India 8th, Toro Rosso 9th, then Marussia occupied the last position in the team standings that offered prize money, above Caterham and HRT. This race was by no means great in terms of entertainment, due to Raikkonen's charge to victory being somewhat anticlimactic, but it certainly shook up the order heading into the next round in Spain. Before the teams headed to Catalonia to begin the European leg of the season, Pirelli held a tyre test at Mugello, where most teams bar Ferrari were quite negative towards the suitability of this venue. Many said that the Tuscan track's high-speed layout bore little resemblance to most of the F1 calendar's circuits, especially ahead of a championship event held at a facility more familiar with testing in Barcelona. Red Bull's Mark Webber said that such running was still important now that testing mileage outside of race weekends had become practically non-existent over the last decade, and it promised to spice things up as many outfits will also bring their first upgrade packages of the year. Spice things up it did, as although Hamilton had initially qualified on pole position, he ran out of fuel on his cooldown lap and was forced to start from the back of the grid. His place was taken by Pastor Maldonado, claiming the first pole of his career for Williams, with Fernando Alonso's Ferrari taking second, his highest grid spot of the year so far. The 2 Lotuses continued their form from Bahrain with Grosjean 3rd and Raikkonen 4th, then Perez was 5th. 3 German drivers followed, those being Rosberg, Vettel and Schumacher, then Kobayashi and Button rounded out the top 10. Webber and DRS occupied the 6th row, then the Scots teammate Hülkenberg was close behind in 13th, ahead of the 2 Toro Rossos of Verne and Ricciardo. Massa in the other Ferrari failed to carry the momentum from the mild promise he'd shown in Sakhir, languishing down in 16th on the grid. Another Brazilian who was struggling while his teammate flourished was Senna, who was knocked out in Q1, his time from that session being 1.6 seconds adrift of Maldonado. Petrov and Kovalainen followed, then came the two Marussias of Pick and Glock, and the HRTs at their home track, led by the Spaniard De La Rosa. As previously mentioned, Hamilton was starting from the back, looking to claw back something to act as damage limitation to his title challenge that had already suffered numerous unfortunate problems. At the start, Alonso got a better jump than Maldonado, and the Venezuelan squeezed Alonso as far as he could to the inside without pushing him onto the grass. Unfortunately for Pasta, this didn't stop the Ferrari driver from getting into turn 1 ahead and keeping the position through to the next corner. Raikkonen got past Grosjean for third, while Perez got a puncture heading through turn 3, sending him off the road and out of contention. Rosberg nabbed another place off a slow starting Lotus of Grosjean into corner 4, while the midfield scrapped away for the minor positions as usual. Hamilton made up 4 places in the first sector alone, and Massa had done something similar, while Webber had dropped down the order. At the end of the first lap, Maldonado trailed Alonso by just over a second, while Schumacher continued to put pressure on the second Lotus driver ahead of him for 5th. Pick spun his Marussia at the exit of turn 3 the second time round, while back out front, the faster Williams tried to get back into DRS range of the leader, setting a purple lap time in the process. Webber took the first planned pit stop of the day on lap 7, having been stuck in the midfield, followed by his teammate the next time round, and Kobayashi the one after that, while the top 3 started to pull away from the chasing pack. While one McLaren was busy carving his way onto the fringes of the top 10, Button made his stop along with Rosberg and Di Resta shortly after, but the leader Alonso was the first major player to make a move on lap 11 by pitting for hards, as well as Grosjean and Schumi who came in for soft rubber. Maldonado covered off his main rival, as did Kimi, adopting the same strategy as Fernando, who retained the lead, while the other Williams of Senna and Grosjean's Lotus had a minor collision going into turn 1, giving the French driver wing damage. Then on the next lap, after briefly attempting to defend position from Schumacher, the Brazilian was rear-ended by the 7-time champion, sending them both into retirement. The 43-year-old was furious, refusing to take blame for the incident, while his younger counterpart, the nephew of one of Michael's rivals from the early part of his career, left all the blame squarely at the German's door. No safety car was deployed, and most agreed that Schumacher was indeed at fault for running straight into the back of the car ahead. Hamilton pitted shortly after the crash, yet suffered another anomaly in this situation as he ran over a laid-down tyre while exiting his stop, launching him into the air and losing him some more time. Grosjean overtook Rosberg for a net 4th, while the minor points positions occupied by the likes of Massa, Hamilton, Webber and Hülkenberg produced some great battles, although the Red Bull in that equation soon dropped out due to front wing problems that forced him to replace it. Meanwhile, back at the front, Maldonado had reeled in Alonso from 5 seconds behind when he exited his stop to less than 2 seconds behind on lap 20, but then he was held up by Karthikeyan while the HRT was being given blue flags, losing the Venezuelan a chance to get into the DRS range of a lead sooner. Hamilton was attempting to make his way past Massa for the final points position, trying to get by on the outside of turn 1, but failed to get alongside and make it stick, while Maldonado came in for his second stop on lap 25, attempting to get an undercut on Alonso. Karthikeyan had retired on the pit exit, while the Williams driver pushed like mad on his outlap to try and usurp his Spanish rival for the lead, which became a lot easier when the Ferrari got stuck behind the backmarker Marussia of Pick, hampering his progress at a crucial moment. He stayed out one more time around before boxing on lap 27, which put Pasta in front by 5 seconds after he set the timing sheets alight with the fastest lap of the race. Raikkonen pitted in due course, handing the official lead back over to Maldonado. Then Vettel and Massa's hopes were diminished when just before the halfway mark, they both received drive-through penalties for overtaking under yellow flags. Pasta initially extended his advantage out in front, but dropped back when his race engineer told him to save his tyres, while Kobayashi made an aggressive pass on Button for 7th on lap 34. Hamilton got into 10th soon after, while after a dismal afternoon and an erroneous pit stop, Perez retired from issues with a loose wheel. Maldonado boxed for the last time with 24 to go, but it was a slow stop, losing him about 3 seconds, while Vettel had a nose change. Alonso rejoined from his final trip to the pits in 3rd, a few seconds behind the yet to stop Kimi and the newly shod Pasta. Maldonado got by Raikkonen before the Ferrari caught up to the pair of them, while once Fernando made the overtake on the Lotus, the Venezuelan was told to save his rubber again, and the Spaniard was given the command to push hard by his team. Kimi was setting fastest laps out of the box, while the leaders continued to follow each other round as the lap tally trickled down. Maldonado managed to blue flag traffic slightly better and gave himself a small amount of breathing room for a small while, while the championship leader, heading into Spain, Vettel, got by Button for 8th. Kobayashi sent a kamikaze dive bomb on Rosberg for 5th, and Vettel closed on Hamilton, overtaking him to take 7th, also catching and passing the only remaining Mercedes for 6th. At the front, Alonso had made an error at turn 9 in the final stage of the race, and couldn't recover back into the DRS range, gradually falling away and into the clutches of a rapid Raikkonen. Maldonado crossed the finish line first on lap 66, taking the victory as Fernando held off Kimi for 2nd as the Lotus just about didn't have enough time to catch him. Grosjean was 4th, 10 seconds adrift of his teammates, followed by the Sauber of Kobayashi and the former championship leader, Vettel, who'd suffered front wing issues and received a drive-through penalty. Rosberg was 7th, Hamilton recovered from his last place start to 8th, his teammate Button was 9th, and Hulkenberg claimed the final point in 10th. Webber struggled to 11th after his early stop and general problems. Verne was 12th ahead of Ricciardo. Then came Di Resta, Massa, who was a lap behind Alonso, Kovalainen, Petrov, Glock, and Della Rosa on both his and his team's home turf was the last finisher in 19th. Perez was the first driver not classified, as was Pick, Karthikeyan, Senna and Schumacher. After an exciting race, Vettel's championship lead had been completely squashed, as he and Alonso were both level on 61 points. Hamilton was 3rd in the standings on 53, followed by Raikkonen, Webber, Button, Rosberg and Grosjean rounding out the top 8. Maldonado skyrocketed up to 9th, then came Perez, Kobayashi, Di Resta, Senna, Verne, Hulkenberg and Ricciardo. Massa and Schumacher were the only other drivers to score in the first 5 races, while Glock and Pick led the battle of the backmarkers from Russia, with Petrov heading Kovalainen as both Caterhams usurped the HRTs of Della Rosa and Karthikeyan. The constructors' order remained relatively unchanged aside from Williams overtaking Sauber, and as the Venezuelan national anthem belted out over the Catalunya circuit, most people were in complete shock. Maldonado had gained a reputation for making needless errors and at points driving dangerously during his junior career, and he hadn't made many friends in his rookie season in F1, coming together with many drivers including Hamilton. Nonetheless, he'd now proved the doubters wrong that he could perform at the top level and that he was the real deal. However, a short time after the race finished, a fire broke out in the Williams garage, setting Senna's car alight and forcing the team and their family members to evacuate. Luckily, no one was injured, although their equipment, such as computers, were severely damaged, and the other teams donated their spare equipment so they wouldn't be as affected in the next race. But this, along with the seemingly out-of-the-blue nature of Maldonado's victory, led some people to believe his triumph was in some ways suspicious. Many fans suspected that the FIA and Williams conspired to give them and Frank Williams a win to celebrate his 70th birthday, but this has no precedent. Furthermore, the team and driver had shown glimpses of great speed in the opening rounds, especially in Australia, where Pastor had been on course for a top 5 late on before crashing out. The Williams engineers had also come up with an ingenious method of warming up the tyres quickly by heating the rim rather than the tyre itself at the Mugello test a week before, something everyone else copied from the next round onwards. However, some think that they were handed special tyres that simply performed better than the rest. I've always dismissed any rumours of collusion with the FIA as rubbish because while Pastor won from pole, Bruno qualified in the joint second worst position he got on Saturday all year, more than 1.5 seconds behind in Q1, and although he was running in the top 10 when he crashed with Schumacher, this was simply because he was on a different strategy and he wasn't on course to score points under normal circumstances. Senna's complete lack of speed in comparison to Maldonado for me proves there was nothing shady going on, as they wouldn't only give special tyres to one driver on the team as that would be suspicious in itself. I just think it came together for Pastor on the day. Furthermore, there were also some who believed that this whole race was a ruse to continue the streak of different drivers winning at the start of 2012, but there were many more well-known names who hadn't tasted the victory yet who would have been far less egregious, like Raikkonen, Hamilton and Webber. I think this all proves Maldonado's win was legitimate, and thus everyone headed into Monaco motivated to prove themselves, while Williams were looking to recover from their post-race problems despite winning. After the elation and then the humble come-down with the garage fire after the race in Catalunya, the paddock pushed on to the Principality to race on the great streets of Monaco. During qualifying, it was Michael Schumacher who took first place in a session on a Saturday for the first time since the 2006 French Grand Prix. He would have become the third oldest pole sitter in F1 history, and the most senior since Jack Brabham at Jarama in 1970, but unfortunately, after his collision with Senna in Spain, he had been awarded a 5-place grid penalty, which would see him demoted to 6th. Thus, inheriting the top spot would be the Red Bull of Webber, followed by Schumacher's teammate Rosberg. Hamilton was 3rd, followed by Grosjean, Alonso and Schumi. Massa and the other Ferrari got into Q3 for the first time all season and started 7th, and Raikkonen was 8th. After his victory in Spain, Maldonado had initially qualified 9th, however he'd been awarded 2 separate grid penalties. Firstly, he was given 10 places for an avoidable collision with Perez in the final free practice. Looking back at the incident, it's clear that Pastor made a dumb move, but I don't think it was worthy of such a big punishment considering Sergio got no damage and was unaffected by the contact. Also, here's a fun fact for you. This was the last time that a driver was handed a 10-place grid drop for anything other than car components until Ollie Behrman got the same in the Principality in the 2025 event during FP2 for overtaking under the red flags. Nonetheless, Maldonado took another penalty for a gearbox change, which dropped into the back row, along with Perez, who also took on more components. This promoted Vettel to 9th after the reigning champion chose not to set a time in Q3 in order to give him free tyre choice for the race start, and thus an opportunity to use fresh rubber. Hulkenberg was 10th, followed by Kobayashi and Button, the Brit failing to reach the top 10 in qualifying for the second race running. Senna was 13th, with the rest of 14th, then the 8th row was filled by the Toro Rossos of Ricciardo and Verne. Kovalainen and Petrov came next, then Glock and De La Rosa, with the Spaniard later saying that his lap was the best he'd ever done at Monaco. Pick was 21st, Karthikeyan 22nd, then came Maldonado and Perez on the back row. Despite being held on the twistiest and most difficult track to overtake on the entire calendar, there was a lot of fanfare outside of the event's regular allure of being part of the Triple Crown of Motorsport and the most important race on the F1 schedule. Heading into the weekend, several teams had sought clarification from the FIA about a hole in the floor of a Red Bull car, which many believed was illegal, yet the Milton Keynes outfit insisted it wasn't. Another interesting prospect was the threat of rain towards the end of proceedings, but nonetheless, when the race started, Webber and Rosberg got away well, as did Schumacher, but when he tried overtaking Grosjean on the left, the Frenchman turned across him, sending himself into a spin and putting him perpendicular to the rest of the field. His car's trajectory saw him slew into the rear of Kobayashi as a Sauber went by, launching the Japanese driver into the air, while further behind, Maldonado capped off an unfortunate weekend by crashing into De La Rosa at turn 1, dismantling the HRT's rear wing and giving them both terminal damage. He parked his car at the hairpin, and the safety car was brought out at the end of the first lap to clear up the chaos, neutralising the field. Webber still led from Rosberg, Hamilton was third, with the 2 Ferraris of Alonso and Massa 4th and 5th. Vettel gained a few places to 6th, followed by Raikkonen and Schumacher in 8th, who had lost out recovering from a contact with Grosjean. Hulkenberg was 9th and Senna creeped into the top 10 in the running order. Despite the early melee, Jenson Button had lost 2 positions, but he hoped to rectify that when the safety car came in at the end of lap 3. It was initially believed that Petrov had retired, just like De La Rosa, Maldonado and Grosjean, but this turned out to be untrue, as he had simply come in for a pit stop. The Caterham set the fastest lap on lap 5, such was the slower pace of a leading pack, while Kobayashi retired at the same time, and there was no completed on-track overtakes until the first pit stop window, as Verne boxed before anyone else, and this phase of the race was so uneventful that a slight mistake from Karthikeyan at the hairpin was shown on the broadcast. Petrov retired with electrical issues, then Rosberg was the earliest of the front pack to pit on the 27th tour of the circuit, the German having been warned about potential rain around lap 25 to 30, which never materialised to more than a handful of drops on the camera lens. He was followed by Webber, Hamilton, Alonso, Massa and some of the midfielders shortly after, as Lewis was jumped by Fernando, his crew causing him problems yet again. Schumacher was the one that gained the most during this phase, getting past Raikkonen, who was held up by Pick, and then was caught out by Perez, who was trying to come in for a stop at the same time the Finn tried to make an overtake on the exit of Rascasse. All this allowed Hulkenberg to sneak by the Lotus driver, a frustrating race becoming even worse for him. The Sauber was handed a drive-through penalty for entering the pit lane too late, and for impeding Raikkonen, to the chagrin of many, as the general consensus was that it was a racing incident. Vettel had taken over from Webber in the lead when he and the rest of the top guys boxed earlier, with the reigning 2-time champion having started on the harder of the 2 available compounds, aiming to go long and overcut those around him. While the others who began on the soft rubber instead of a super soft came in around half distance, Seb kept plodding along in clean air in first position, although his teammate was gaining on him slightly. He finally came in at the end of lap 46, rejoining in 4th, handing the advantage back to Webber, Rosberg and Alonso. He also usurped several drivers, including Hamilton, who had now lost 2 positions due to unfortunate pit cycle circumstances. With under 25 to go, Glock's Marussia shed a piece of its front wing going through the swimming pool section, while Webber heavily flat-spotted his tyres by locking up at the Nouvelle chicane. Perez took the fastest lap, which if he kept hold of it would make him the 6th driver in as many races to score that distinction in 2012. Meanwhile, Schumacher began developing a mechanical fault, which soon saw Verne easily pass him in the closing stages, followed by DRS and Hulkenberg, before the 7-time champion pulled into the garage to retire from his issues. The light rain from earlier reappeared, and Rosberg closed up to Webber as the German felt more confident in the greasy conditions. Button, meanwhile, had been in the doldrums, stuck behind Kovalainen all race after his bad qualifying, and had tried a half-hearted move on the Caterham for 12th on lap 65, but still couldn't get by. Ricciardo went out with steering trouble as the 5 drivers behind the leading Red Bull at the front began forming a train behind the Aussie as he backed off the pace entirely, cautious of the increasing rain and tyre wear. Perez spun at Sandevot trying to overtake Kovalainen, while Verne pitted for intermediates with 7 to go, while still in the points, the Frenchman taking a massive risk on the weather worsening. Meanwhile, to cap off a miserable weekend for the Brit, Button locked up trying to overtake the Caterham that had held him up all race at the swimming pool chicane and spun, then pulled off at turn 1 with a puncture. Kovalainen was involved in yet another tangle with Perez, this time coming out of a tunnel into the seafront section, while Verne's tyre gamble appeared not to have worked when the rain failed to get heavier. The order stayed the same until the end, and so, Webber won his first race of 2012, the 6th different driver to do so in the season, after having not led a single lap before this round of the campaign. Rosberg crossed the line second, with Alonso third and Vettel fourth, the leading quartet separated by less than 1.5 seconds at the checkered flag. Hamilton took fifth, losing out on yet more points due to factors outside of his control. Massa was 6th, followed by the Force Indias of De Resta and Hulkenberg, Raikkonen in 9th sporting a special James Hunt replica helmet, and taking the last point was Senna for Williams. Perez, who was lapping faster than the leaders at the end and hounded Massa in the final stages, was the first driver outside the top 10. Then came Verne, who missed out on what would have been the then best finish of his career due to the strategy call to switch to Inters. Despite a clumsy end to proceedings, Kovalainen came home 13th after a great drive, followed by Glock's Marussia and Karthikeyan's HRT as the last finishers on the road. Button, who had retired on lap 70, was still classified as he completed 90% of the full race distance, but the typically high attrition rate around the streets of the Principality saw Ricciardo, Pick, Schumacher, Petrov, Kobayashi, Grosjean, De La Rosa and Maldonado all retire, and the results also saw some movement in the standings. Alonso had leapfrogged Vettel to go 3 points clear at the top of the championship, while Webber levelled his teammate's score and sat 3rd overall thanks to his victory. Hamilton dropped to 4th, while Rosberg rose to 5th, with Raikkonen's anonymous day demoting him to 6th. Button's early season form had well and truly gone to pieces, having now only scored 2 points in the previous 3 rounds, and Grosjean's first lap calamities had put him into early retirement for the 3rd time so far in the year. Maldonado and Perez, who had come together on the Friday and experienced pointless weekends, remained stagnant in their positions just inside the top 10, while De Resta usurped Kobayashi in the midfield battle. Senna was still 13th, while Massa's best result of the year moved him up to 10 points, 66 shy of his teammate, followed by Hulkenberg, Verne, Ricciardo and Schumacher, the latter of whom had suffered rotten luck, having at least 3 potential podiums due to various factors. Kovalainen strengthened his and his team's standing amongst the backmarkers, followed by Glock, Pick, Karthikeyan and De La Rosa. Red Bull kept their constructors' title lead, extending their gap over McLaren in 2nd. Ferrari equalled Lotus on 86 points, but went ahead on countback, while everything stayed the same in the upper to lower midfield. Mercedes remained in 5th, with Williams 6th, Sauber 7th, Force India 8th and Toro Rosso 9th, while Kovalainen's 13th place moved Caterham above Marussia into a crucial 10th place that was the final position to offer out prize money for teams. Protests over the legality of Red Bull's car were actioned after the race. The FIA clarified before the next event that the grey area in the regulations that the team has exploited was now illegal, meaning that no action would be taken against previous results, but going forward they would have to run a floor without any holes in it, along with the car's axles, as they were also found to be contravening the rules. The 7th race of the season saw the F1 Circus arrive in Montreal, Canada, to race around the circuit named in honour of Gilles Villeneuve after his win there in 1978. Heading into the weekend, there were several talking points. The DRS zone on the main straight that existed in 2011 was removed, and the one situated on the back straight, approaching the final chicane, was shortened, as it was deemed by the governing body that overtaking was too easy the previous year. Furthermore, just like at the Bahrain race earlier in 2012, the event was held in spite of protests threatening disruption to proceedings. Student groups from the city's university and online hackers targeting the Formula 1 website aimed to stop the weekend from going ahead, but aside from cancelling what appeared to be a meet and greet session on the Thursday, everything went smoothly and was uninterrupted. Coming off the back of a strong Monaco weekend, Kovalainen crashed in free practice 1. Senna and Vergne decided to join him and do the same in the 2 respective remaining sessions, but in qualifying, it was Vettel who topped the timesheets, joined by Hamilton on the front row, then came Alonso and Webber. Rosberg was 5th, keeping up his consistent qualifying form as the only driver to start every race so far in 2012 inside the top 7. Then came Massa, who continued his reasonable form from Monte Carlo. Grosjean showed impressive 1-lap pace to go 7th, ahead of Di Resta, Schumacher and Button, who rounded out the top 10. Kobayashi was 11th, while differential issues put Raikkonen down in 12th, followed by Hülkenberg, Ricciardo, Perez and Senna rounding out the midfield runners. Kovalainen was the leader of the 2 Caterhams, ahead of Petrov, as both occupied the 9th row. Then came Vergne and Della Rosa in 19th and 20th. Glock was 21st and Maldonado was 22nd, although the Venezuelan should have been on for much more, as he had gotten through to Q2 and in the dying moments set a purple first sector, well on course to reach the top 10, but he lost the rear coming out of the last corner and hit the wall of champions as he spun. This forced him to take a 5-place grid drop for a gearbox change, demoting him from 17th to the penultimate row of the grid, when he should have been on for a great result. Pick lined up 23rd, and Carl Verkeyen was last, bringing up the rear of the field for HRT. 12 months on from the chaotic wet race that Jenson Button had committed war crimes on his way to winning, blue skies in this one meant that tyre temperature, preservation and strategy would play a massive part. Most drivers started on the super softs, but Button, Raikkonen, Hülkenberg, Perez, Della Rosa and Maldonado began on the yellow-walled softs, most looking to gain positions by overcutting to make up for a poor Saturday. The order mostly stayed the same at the start, with the only overtake in the top 10 being Di Resta passing Grosjean for 7th. The drivers on the slower tyres got away well, with Maldonado getting by the backmarkers into 19th by the end of lap 1. Massa overtook Rosberg for 5th, with DRS soon after, then the German lost another spot to Di Resta at the same point on the circuit. Despite setting the fastest lap once in clean air, the Ferrari of Felipe spun on lap 6, dropping out of the points while Vettel pulled clear of Hamilton out in front. Massa made the first pit stop of the race on lap 13, rejoining in 20th, then came Di Resta and Schumacher the next time round. Raikkonen overtook Button, the Brit then being harried by Kobayashi as he struggled on the prime tyres until he also came in for new rubber. While those in the midfield scrapped away, Hamilton got in Vettel's DRS range and Alonso was catching the pair of them for the lead. The leading Red Bull decided not to fight on track, instead boxing for a set of primes on lap 18, rejoining behind Grosjean, while Lewis followed him in a lap later to cover the undercut, along with Webber. The McLaren got away from his pit stop slowly, but still rejoined ahead of Vettel, while the Ferrari of Fernando stayed out a little bit longer to try and extend his first stint, and rejoined ahead of both Lewis and Seb into the net lead. This was short-lived though, as Hamilton soon blasted past with DRS before the end of that lap. Then Grosjean made his first stop from ahead of a trio of battling champions, relinquishing the lead to all of them. Lewis began pulling away from the 2 behind him, but there was brief yellow flags as Carl Verkeyen spun at turn 1, then pulled over at the end of the first sector with brake failure. His teammate Della Rosa came into the pits with the same issue shortly after, and many have since speculated that this double retirement was actually planned. In 2012, it was no secret that HRT had by far the worst car on the grid, with a considerable gap even between them and the other backmarker teams. Perhaps it was strange then that in the race in Canada, Della Rosa was running comfortably ahead of both Marussias on merit when he retired. Some fans have since speculated that since their brake failures both came within a few laps of each other, that the team knew that they weren't going to make it to the end of the race due to these issues, so they decided to massively underfuel the cars so they could run a lot faster than they otherwise would, in an attempt to bring in sponsorship or just because they could. Meanwhile, back at the front, Perez was running P5 after having not stopped yet, and was matching the leader's pace despite being on much older tyres, highlighting just how good the Sauber package was at saving rubber. While Hamilton was leading, his teammate Button pitted from 14th, having struggled all weekend after missing a lot of free practice running due to mechanical problems, and he rejoined in 17th. Rosberg was closing up to the small train being formed by Raikkonen and Perez, who hadn't stopped yet, but a German pitted for new tyres just as he approached the back of him. Webber made a small mistake in the middle sector of lap 39, but soon recovered by setting strong sector times before Raikkonen boxed from 4th and came out ahead of Rosberg, despite the Mercedes setting the fastest lap. The other one-stopper, Perez, soon made his pit stop, and as he rejoined the racetrack, Nico overtook Kimi, then Sergio on the exit to turn 2. While one Silver Arrow was making up positions, Schumacher had to retire as his rear wing flap had got stuck open and he was unable to be closed. The 43-year-old had lost yet another result in the early stage of this season, albeit this one much more anonymous than the others. Had Michael not had the mechanical issues and the incidents in Malaysia and Spain with Grosjean and Senna, he would have gained at least 80 points, possibly more, and been leading the standings, yet instead he sat on just 2. Verne got a drive-through penalty for speeding in the pit lane, while Hamilton, who was still leading, began complaining about a lack of rear grip and came in for new tyres on the end of lap 50, although yet another slow stop in the season hampered his progress. He rejoined in third, 15 seconds behind Alonso in first, with 20 to go. Webber followed his lead by boxing himself and rejoined just clear of Raikkonen, although he needed to chase after Rosberg. Massa, Perez and Nico all scrapped over 5th place, with Rosberg losing out to both his fellow rivals, while Sergio got by Felipe with DRS. Massa's tyres fell off the cliff and he boxed, while Hamilton began setting the timing screens purple and closed into within only 5 seconds of the lead and less than 3 behind Vettel with only 10 laps remaining. He was on the German's rear end by the end of lap 61 and got by on the back straight with DRS. He almost instantly caught Alonso, while Seb pitted for new softs and dropped to 5th. Lewis got by Fernando with ease with 6 to go, then Alonso's tyres fell off and he was overtaken by Grosjean. Perez was catching him at a rate of 3 seconds a lap, setting his own purple times, and got by as they came onto the penultimate tour. Vettel then overtook the struggling Ferrari driver himself, but no one could stop Hamilton from making it 7 winners in the first 7 races of 2012 in a fantastic strategic battle that saw him and his crew outsmart everyone. Grosjean came home in the runners-up position, 2.5 seconds behind, then Perez was third. Vettel was 4th after he bit the bullet and pitted towards the end, taking the fastest lap as he took the checkered flag. Then came Alonso, who could have easily dropped as low as 8th had the race gone 1 lap longer. Close behind him were Rosberg in 6th, Webber in 7th and Raikkonen rounding out the top 8, with Kobayashi and Massa filling out the final points positions. The Force Indias of Di Resta and Hulkenberg were 11th and 12th, while Maldonado put on an unrecognised decent recovery drive to 13th, lapping faster than the leaders even were at the end, and without his grid drop could have easily made up more ground. Ricciardo was 14th with an anonymous drive, a late spin all we really saw of him, while his teammate Verne was the first driver a lap down, ahead of Button, who struggled his way to 16th, this being the 4th time in the last 6 races he finished outside the top 10. Senna was 17th, losing a minute to his counterpart Maldonado after the Venezuelan overtook him on lap 5. The Caterhams of Kovalainen and Petrov came next, and Pick was the last finisher in 20th. Glock had dropped out late on with brake failure, while the Mercedes of Schumacher had its DRS problem diagnosed as a hydraulics issue, and the double HRT retirements were the first of the day. Hamilton's victory moved him to the top of the standings on 88 points, 2 ahead of Alonso and 3 clear of Vettel. Webber's less optimal day saw him slump to 4th, albeit still within single digits of Lewis. Then came the solid midfielder Rosberg, the Lotus duo of Raikkonen and Grosjean, now narrowly separated by only a small margin, and Button, who had fallen to 8th. Perez's podium moved him past Maldonado, while Kobayashi squeaked ahead of Di Resta on countback. Senna was still ahead of Massa, with Hulkenberg 15th, Verne 16th, Ricciardo 17th, and the perennially unlucky Schumacher in 18th as the last driver in a championship who had scored points. The lack of attrition meant that Kovalainen and Glock failed to be usurped by Pick, Carl Verkeyen, Petrov or De La Rosa, while in the constructors, McLaren closed the gap to Red Bull and Lotus overtook Ferrari for 3rd. Mercedes remained in the position they began the race, in 5th, as did every team below them, meaning Sauber was still 6th, Williams was still 7th, Force India were 8th, Toro Rosso were 9th, and Caterham were leading Marussia and HRT in the battle of the backmarkers. In the first 7 rounds of 2012, there had now been 7 different race winners. Button had won Australia with a measured drive, and Alonso had usurped Perez in Malaysia as the young Mexican cracked under immense pressure. Rosberg took advantage of Mercedes' double DRS in China, while Vettel's year truly kicked off in Bahrain, even though he was heavily pressured by Raikkonen. Maldonado's triumph in Spain proved a lot of his haters wrong, as he provided proof that he could win in arguably the toughest circumstances ever for someone who hadn't yet stood on the top step of the podium in a Grand Prix. Webber proved himself in the Principality, as despite the track's obvious flaws in terms of providing overtaking opportunities, it was clear that he was the driver of the day, and Hamilton and McLaren pulled off a fantastic strategy to win in Canada. 7 winners from the first 7 races might have been the most dramatic start to an F1 season ever, but it goes even deeper than that. With the inclusion of Perez, Raikkonen, Schumacher and Grosjean, who could have easily been winners under different circumstances, the fact that more than 10 drivers showed golden potential shows just how great the start to 2012 was. The worst of the bunch in terms of entertainment was definitely Bahrain, but in the others, tyre degradation and the unstable handling characteristics of the cars provided great opportunity for a good show, even if there wasn't always action happening on track. In my opinion, 2012 is the greatest season in the modern era of Formula 1, and this run at the start of the year is a lot of the reason why. From established names to fresh faces, it seemed like anyone could end up with a win or a podium if they just put in a great performance. This video is the first in what I intend to be a 3-part series on the greatest season in F1 history, as I'll split the rest of the year into similar sized chunks to make it easier for the audience to watch and make it easier for me to produce. Once all the 3 parts have been released onto YouTube, I'll combine them all into one big video so it can be viewed seamlessly from start to finish. This is my first video in quite a while, so I apologise to my long-term subscribers for not posting in ages. University assignments and general real-life things have just got in the way of YouTube, but I hope that now I'm in academic hibernation, I can begin to upload more regularly again. I'll work on part 2 of this project alongside other shorter videos to supplement in the meantime, but without further ado, I think that brings today's video to a close. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe to see more content from me in the future. You can also subscribe to my Patreon if you'd like to see exclusive content, get videos a day early, and have an opportunity to converse with me personally for as little as $1 per month. Big shout out to my already existing Patreon subscribers Andy Lamberts and Elizabeth Hearn, and you can also take a look at the DRS Train Podcast, which I host alongside Peter Brook, Nav F1 and Ciaron Smith, where we take deep dives into historical topics and race reviews after each round of the current F1 season. Furthermore, you should also go and follow my X/Twitter account, where I post boiling hot lava takes on F1, IndyCar and NASCAR at Nedzo_F1, and follow my Instagram for any behind the scenes updates that I may post. With my shameless plugging over though, I'm Nedzo, and I'll see you all later. Bye!